I've spent the better part of 3 decades studying how companies are built, how they scale, and most importantly, how they either sustain their principles or abandon them under pressure. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. The moment you optimize for the short term, you mortgage the future. That trade-off might not show up on a balance sheet immediately, but it compounds. And compounding, as we all know, works both ways. So why am I bringing this up now? Because we're witnessing something extraordinary and troubling unfolding at Amazon. Not in the headlines, not in the quarterly earnings reports, but in the silent spaces where real decisions are made. The kind of decisions that don't make news until years later when historians and business analysts look back and say, that was the turning point. Jeff Bezos, the man who built Amazon from a garage into one of the most valuable companies on earth, has always operated with a philosophy that runs counter to almost everything Wall Street teaches. He's obsessed with the long term. He's obsessed with customers. He's obsessed with day one thinking. The idea that every day should feel like the first day of a startup, not the comfortable cruise of an established empire. But here's what's happening right now, and you need to understand this clearly, that philosophy is under siege, not from competitors, not from regulators, though they're certainly circling, but from within, from the very people who are supposed to be carrying the torch. Before we go further, subscribe to stay updated on these deep analyses and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me walk you through what's really going on, because this isn't just about Amazon. This is about what happens when a system built on long-term principles collides with institutions that reward short-term performance. It's about whether truly transformational thinking can survive in an environment designed to kill it, the silent fracture. You see, Amazon has always been different. And I don't mean that in the superficial way people talk about disruption or innovation. I mean structurally, philosophically different. Most companies, once they reach a certain scale, shift into what I call optimization mode. They stop inventing. They stop taking risks. They start managing what they have instead of building what's next. That's not a criticism. It's often the rational response to shareholder pressure, competitive dynamics, and the natural human tendency to protect what you've already won. But Bezos never allowed Amazon to enter that mode. He wrote about this explicitly in his shareholder letters. Day one companies are always inventing, he said. Day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating painful decline, followed by death. Those aren't just words, that's a governing philosophy. And for more than 2 decades, Amazon operated that way. It took massive risks. It endured years of losses in new ventures. It prioritized long-term market position over short-term profitability. AWS, Prime, Alexa, logistics infrastructure, none of those would exist if Amazon had been optimizing for quarterly earnings. But now something is shifting, and the people on the inside are starting to feel it. Multiple sources, former executives, current employees, industry analysts who track these things closely report that there's a growing tension inside Amazon, a quiet but very real friction between those who still believe in the day one philosophy and those who think the company needs to grow up. Now, what does grow up mean in this context? It means shifting focus from invention to optimization. It means prioritizing profitability over growth. It means making decisions that Wall Street rewards in the short term, even if they undermine long-term positioning. And here's the thing, this tension isn't new. It's been building for years, but it's reached a critical threshold. The kind where internal debates that used to happen quietly are now leaking into public discourse. The kind where senior leaders are leaving, not because of better opportunities elsewhere, but because they no longer believe in the direction. In investing, we call this institutional drift. It's when the principles that made a company great slowly erode, not through any single bad decision, but through 1,000 small compromises. Each one seems rational in isolation, but together they change the character of the organization. And once that character changes, it's almost impossible to get it back. The regulatory noose. Now let's talk about the external pressure, because it's impossible to understand the internal fracture without understanding the external forces amplifying it. Amazon is under more regulatory scrutiny than at any point in its history. The Federal Trade Commission has filed antitrust lawsuits. The European Union is enforcing stricter data and competition regulations. Members of Congress from both parties are calling for Amazon to be broken up. And here's what you need to understand. Regulatory pressure changes incentives. When a company is facing potential breakup, when it's being accused of anti-competitive behavior, when every strategic move is being scrutinized by government lawyers, the natural response is to become defensive, to stop pushing boundaries, to avoid anything that could be used as ammunition against you. That's the rational response from a legal and political standpoint.
But it's the opposite of the day one mentality, because day one thinking requires experimentation, risk-taking, and pushing into uncomfortable territory. So you have this impossible dilemma. How do you stay aggressive and inventive when every aggressive move invites more regulatory scrutiny? I've seen this pattern before in other industries. I've watched companies that were once bold and transformational become cautious and bureaucratic because they were afraid of legal consequences. And once that fear takes root, it spreads. It becomes part of the organizational DNA. Now, I'm not saying Amazon is there yet, but the warning signs are visible. When senior leaders start saying things like, we need to be more thoughtful about how we're perceived, or we need to build better relationships with regulators, those are code words. They mean we're entering defensive mode. And in business, just like in investing, defense doesn't win championships. Defense keeps you from losing catastrophically, but it doesn't create new value. It doesn't invent the future. The Wall Street problem. Here's where it gets even more complicated, because while Amazon is dealing with regulators, it's also dealing with Wall Street, and Wall Street has very specific expectations. Amazon stock has been a darling of growth investors for decades, but in recent years, the market has started asking a different question: when does growth turn into profitability? That's a fair question, by the way. No company can grow indefinitely without eventually delivering returns to shareholders, but the timing matters, and the way you transition from growth mode to profitability mode matters even more. Bezos always understood this. He was willing to sacrifice short-term profits for long-term market dominance. He famously told investors, "We're not trying to optimize for this quarter, we're trying to build something that matters in 10 years. And for a long time, Wall Street was okay with that, because the growth was so explosive, because Amazon kept entering new markets and dominating them. Investors were willing to give Bezos the benefit of the doubt. But now, the patience is wearing thin. Institutional investors, pension funds, hedge funds, asset managers are pushing for more consistent profitability. They're pushing for dividends. They're pushing for share buybacks. All the things that signal a company has matured, and from their perspective, it's not unreasonable. Amazon is no longer a scrappy startup. It's one of the most valuable companies on the planet. At some point, it needs to deliver returns. But here's the problem. Optimizing for shareholder returns in the short term is incompatible with the day one philosophy. If Amazon starts prioritizing quarterly earnings, it will stop making the kinds of long-term bets that created AWS Prime and its logistics empire. It will start cutting costs in ways that improve the balance sheet, but degrade the customer experience. It will start behaving like every other mature company, optimizing what it has instead of inventing what's next. And once that happens, the very thing that made Amazon special will be gone.
The Amazon paradox, when success becomes the enemy. Now let me explain something that most people miss when they analyze Amazon. There's a paradox at the heart of this company, and understanding it is crucial to understanding why the current moment is so precarious. The paradox is this: Amazon's greatest success, AWS, is also the thing that's quietly changing the company's DNA. Let me walk you through this because it's subtle, but it matters. When Amazon launched Amazon Web Services in 2006, it wasn't because Bezos sat down and said we should get into the cloud computing business. It happened almost accidentally. Amazon had built this massive internal infrastructure to handle its own e-commerce operations. Servers, storage, computing power, all the technical backbone you need to run a global retail operation. And at some point, someone inside Amazon had a realization: we've built something that other companies need. What if we sold access to our infrastructure? What if we let other businesses rent our computing power? That was AWS. And for the first few years, it was a side project, a curiosity, something that bled money while Amazon figured out how to make it work. But then something remarkable happened. AWS started growing fast, and more importantly, it started generating real profits. Unlike retail, which operates on razor-thin margins, cloud computing has extraordinary economics. Once you've built the infrastructure, the incremental cost of adding another customer is minimal. But you can charge them premium rates because the value you're providing, reliable, scalable computing power, is so high. By 2024, AWS accounted for roughly 60% of Amazon's operating income. Let me repeat that. 60% of Amazon's profits come from a business that didn't exist 20 years ago. Now, on the surface, that looks like a triumph, and in many ways it is. AWS is one of the most successful business pivots in corporate history. It validates Bezos' philosophy of long-term thinking and experimentation. But here's the paradox. AWS's success is making Amazon less willing to take the kinds of risks that created AWS in the first place. You see, when you have a business that's generating that much profit, that much cash flow, the rational thing to do is protect it. You start thinking defensively. You start asking, what could disrupt AWS? What could threaten this golden goose? And when you're thinking that way, you become more cautious, more conservative, more focused on defending what you have instead of inventing what's next. I've seen this pattern before. I've watched it happen to companies I've invested in, companies I've studied, companies that were once bold and transformational. Success breeds caution, and caution over time kills innovation. Now, I'm not saying Amazon has stopped innovating. They're still launching new products, entering new markets, experimenting with new technologies, but there's a difference between innovation at the margins and the kind of fundamental bet-the-company risk-taking that defined Amazon's early years. When Bezos launched AWS, Amazon was already a successful e-commerce company. He didn't need to get into cloud computing. It was risky, it was unproven, it required massive capital investment with no guarantee of returns. But he did it anyway, because he believed the long-term opportunity was worth the short-term cost. That's the day one mentality. That's what made Amazon special. But now, with AWS generating 60% of profits, with Wall Street analysts scrutinizing every quarter, with regulators circling, with internal pressure to deliver consistent results, can Amazon still make those kinds of bets? Can they launch a business that loses billions for years before it pays off? Can they endure the criticism, the skepticism, the doubt? I don't know, but I'm watching closely, because if the answer is no, if Amazon has become too successful to take big risks, then the very thing that made them great will be the thing that limits their future. That's the paradox. Success creates resources, but it also creates fear, and fear is the enemy of innovation. The culture war when the builders leave. Now let's talk about something that doesn't show up in quarterly earnings but matters just as much: the people. Amazon has always been known for its intense culture. Long hours, high expectations, relentless pressure to deliver. It's not for everyone, but for the people who thrived there, the builders, the inventors, the ones who loved the challenge, it was exhilarating. For years, Amazon attracted some of the best talent in tech, not because they paid the most, though compensation was competitive, but because the mission was compelling. You were building something that mattered. You were inventing the future. You were part of a company that refused to settle. But something has shifted, and the people on the inside are feeling it. Over the past few years, there's been a quiet exodus of senior leaders. Not all at once, not in a dramatic wave, but a steady trickle. VP-level executives, directors, principal engineers, the kind of people who were there during the high-growth years, who helped build AWS, who believed in the day one philosophy. Now, when senior people leave a company, the official story is always the same: pursuing other opportunities, spending more time with family, ready for a new challenge. But if you talk to people off the record, if you dig into what's really happening, you hear a different story. You hear frustration, you hear exhaustion, and most tellingly you hear this: it's not the same company anymore. That phrase, "it's not the same company anymore," is one of the most dangerous things you can hear inside an organization, because it means the culture has shifted. The principles that once defined the company are eroding, and the people who embodied those principles are leaving. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying Amazon has become a bad place to work. I'm not saying leadership doesn't care about culture, but I am saying that culture is not maintained by intention alone. It's maintained by action, by the decisions you make, by the behaviors you reward, by the people you promote. And when you're under the kind of pressure Amazon is under, regulatory scrutiny, investor demands, internal complexity, the natural response is to become more bureaucratic, more process-driven, more focused on managing risk instead of taking it. That's not a conscious choice, it's a gravitational pull. And if you're not actively resisting it, you drift. Here's a specific example. Amazon used to have a principle called disagree and commit. The idea was simple. When leaders were making a decision, everyone had a voice. You could argue your position, you could push back. But once a decision was made, you committed fully, even if you disagreed. That principle only works in a high-trust environment. It requires that people believe their dissent is genuinely heard, that leaders are making decisions based on what's best for the long term, not what's politically safe. But when trust erodes, when people start to believe that decisions are being made for the wrong reasons, disagree and commit becomes shut up and comply. And once that happens, you lose the people who disagree, the ones who challenge assumptions, the ones who say, "I think we're making a mistake here." Those are the people you need most, because they're the ones who keep you honest. They're the ones who prevent groupthink. They're the ones who force you to think harder, to question your assumptions, to consider whether you're optimizing for the right things. When those people leave, you're left with two types: those who genuinely believe in the current direction and those who've learned to stay quiet. Neither is enough. What I learned from watching Microsoft. Now, I want to step back and give you some context, because Amazon is not the first company to face this moment, and understanding how other companies navigated similar transitions can teach us a lot. Let me tell you about Microsoft. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Microsoft was the most dominant company in tech. They had a monopoly on operating systems. Windows and Office were printing money. The company was incredibly profitable. But by the late 2000s, Microsoft had stopped being interesting. They were still successful. Revenues were growing, profits were strong, but they weren't inventing the future anymore. They were defending the past. They missed the smartphone revolution.
They missed the cloud revolution, at least initially. They became bureaucratic, slow, inward-looking. Why? Because success had made them cautious. They were so focused on protecting Windows, so afraid of cannibalizing their own products, that they couldn't see the world was changing. It took a new CEO, Satya Nadella, to break that pattern. And what Nadella did was remarkable. He didn't just change Microsoft's strategy, he changed its culture. He made it safe to take risks again. He rewarded experimentation. He shifted the focus from protecting Windows to building the future. And it worked. Microsoft stock has tripled under Nadella's leadership. Azure is now a real competitor to AWS. The company is relevant again. But here's the key insight. That transformation almost didn't happen. Before Nadella, Microsoft went through several CEOs who tried to shift the culture and failed. Steve Ballmer, who led Microsoft from 2000 to 2014, was a brilliant operator. He understood the business, he knew the market, but he couldn't change the culture because he was a product of it. He believed in the same things the old Microsoft believed in. It took an outsider, someone who wasn't emotionally attached to Windows, who didn't have a career built on defending the old model to make the necessary changes. Now, here's the question. Can Amazon avoid the same trap Microsoft fell into? Can Andy Jassy, who built AWS, who succeeded within the current system, be the one to transform the culture? Or does that kind of transformation require someone from outside? I don't know the answer, but I know this. The longer Amazon waits, the harder it becomes. Cultural change is like turning a ship. The bigger the ship, the more momentum it has, the longer it takes to change direction. And Amazon is a very big ship now. The human cost of relentless growth. Now, let's talk about something uncomfortable. Something that doesn't get discussed much in business analysis but matters deeply. The human cost. Amazon's culture has always been intense. Bezos built the company with a set of leadership principles that emphasized customer obsession, ownership, bias for action, and delivering results. These principles drove incredible performance. They created a company that could execute at scale, but they also created an environment that was for many people unsustainable. There are stories, many of them now public, of employees burning out, of people working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks for years, of a performance review system that was so harsh, so unforgiving, that it left people feeling expendable. Now, I'm not here to moralize. Every company makes trade-offs. Some prioritize work-life balance, others prioritize mission and growth. Amazon chose the latter. And for the people who thrived in that environment, it was worth it. But here's the thing, you can't sustain that culture indefinitely. In the early years, when Amazon was a startup, when everyone was young and hungry, when the mission felt urgent and transformational, people were willing to make those sacrifices. They believed they were building something that mattered. But as the company matured, as it became one of the largest employers in the world, as the mission shifted from invent the future to optimize operations, the calculus changed. Why would someone work 70 hours a week to hit quarterly targets? What's the higher purpose in optimizing a logistics algorithm or improving ad conversion rates by 0.5%? Those things matter for the business, but they don't inspire. They don't make people willing to sacrifice. And so quietly, the culture has shifted. Amazon still expects high performance, but the emotional connection, the sense that you're part of something transformational, has weakened. I've talked to former Amazon employees, and the pattern I hear is this: I'm proud of what we built, but I couldn't do it anymore. The cost was too high. That's not a criticism of Amazon. It's an observation. High-performance cultures have a shelf life, and Amazon's culture, the one Bezos built, was designed for a specific phase: hypergrowth, invention, market domination. But now Amazon is no longer in that phase. It's in a different one: maturity, optimization, defense. And the culture that got them here is not necessarily the culture that will take them forward.
The choice every institution faces. So let's zoom out, because this isn't just about Amazon. This is about a choice every institution eventually faces. Do you evolve or do you ossify? Ossify is a strong word. It means to harden into bone, to become rigid, to lose flexibility. And that's what happens to institutions that stop questioning themselves. They keep doing what worked before, even when the context has changed. They promote people who fit the old model, even when a new model is needed. They defend their culture, even when that culture is becoming a liability. And the thing is, this process is almost invisible from the inside, because at every step, the decisions seem rational. You're not consciously choosing to become rigid. You're just trying to manage complexity, reduce risk, deliver results. But over time, those small decisions compound. And one day you wake up and realize your company, your institution, your culture is no longer capable of the kind of bold thinking that made it successful in the first place. I've seen this pattern in business. I've seen it in government. I've seen it in nonprofit organizations. Hell, I've seen it in families. The institutions that survive, that remain relevant across generations, are the ones that periodically go through painful self-examination. They ask, are we still who we say we are? Or have we become something else? That question requires honesty, and honesty is expensive, Because if the answer is we've drifted from our principles, then you have to make hard choices. You have to change things that are comfortable. You have to challenge people who are powerful. You have to admit that success has made you complacent. Most institutions don't do that. They tell themselves a story. We're fine. We're still innovative. We're still customer obsessed. We're still day one. But saying it doesn't make it true. Why this moment matters for all of us. Now here's why this matters beyond Amazon, beyond business, beyond Jeff Bezos. Because the tension Amazon is facing, short-term pressure versus long-term vision, is the same tension every single one of us faces in our own lives. Do you take the promotion that pays more but moves you away from the work you love? Do you optimize your career for immediate financial rewards or for long-term fulfillment? Do you build a business that maximizes quarterly profits or one that creates lasting value? Do you raise your kids to achieve high test scores or to think independently? These are not abstract questions. These are the daily trade-offs we all navigate. And the lesson from Amazon, from Bezos, from the day one philosophy, from this entire story is that the long-term path is always harder in the moment. It requires patience when everyone around you is impatient. It requires conviction when everyone is doubting you. It requires the willingness to be misunderstood, to be criticized, to be questioned. But it's the only path that leads to something that lasts. I've been investing for decades, and the best investments I've ever made were the ones that looked questionable at the time. The ones where people said, that's too risky, that's too long-term, that's not going to work. But I understood the fundamentals, I believed in the vision, and I was willing to wait. That's the Bezos lesson, that's the day one lesson. And right now, Amazon is at a crossroads. They can optimize for the short term, deliver the quarterly results Wall Street wants, play it safe with regulators, stop making big bets, or they can stay true to the philosophy that made them great, take risks, invent, stay in day one mode even when it's uncomfortable. I don't know which path they'll choose, but I'm watching, because the choice they make will tell us something important, not just about Amazon, but about whether long-term thinking can survive in a world that rewards short-term results, Bezos' dilemma. Now let's talk about Jeff Bezos himself, because this is where the human element enters the picture. Bezos is no longer CEO. He stepped down in 2021, handing the role to Andy Jassy. But make no mistake, Bezos is still the largest individual shareholder, and his influence is enormous. He's still involved in major strategic decisions. He's still the philosophical anchor of the company. But here's the thing, when you step away from day-to-day operations, you lose some control over the culture. Culture is not maintained by vision statements or shareholder letters. It's maintained by the daily decisions leaders make, the behaviors they reward, the people they promote. And when new leadership takes over, even well-intentioned, capable leadership, the culture inevitably shifts. Jassy is a brilliant operator. He built AWS from the ground up. He understands technology, cloud infrastructure, and long-term strategic positioning. But he's also inheriting a company under immense pressure. Pressure from regulators, from investors, from employees who are exhausted from years of relentless growth. And that pressure creates a gravitational pull toward short-term thinking. It's subtle, but it's real. When you're dealing with lawsuits, when you're being questioned by Congress, when institutional investors are pushing for profitability, the path of least resistance is to make compromises. Now, I don't know Andy Jassy personally. I can't speak to his internal motivations or his private conversations with Bezos. But I can tell you this, the transition from founder-led to professional management is one of the most dangerous moments in any company's history, because founders have a level of conviction that's almost impossible to replicate. They built the company from nothing. They endured years of doubt and failure. They have a visceral understanding of what the company stands for. Professional managers, no matter how talented, don't have that same emotional anchor. They're optimizing a system they inherited, not defending a vision they created. And that difference over time changes everything. The cost of misunderstanding. Bezos once wrote something that I think about often. We are willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time. That sentence is deceptively simple, but it contains a profound insight. Building something truly transformational requires making decisions that don't make sense to most people. It requires enduring criticism, skepticism, and even ridicule. When Amazon was losing money in its early years, analysts called it Amazon.bomb. When Bezos invested billions into AWS, people questioned whether a retail company had any business running data centers. When he launched Prime, critics said customers would never pay for shipping. But Bezos didn't care. He understood something fundamental. If everyone agrees with your strategy, you're not doing anything interesting. The problem is, being misunderstood has a cost. It creates internal friction. It tests the loyalty of employees and investors. It requires constant communication, constant reinforcement of the vision. And when the founder steps back, when new leadership takes over, when the company matures and faces new pressures, that's when the willingness to be misunderstood starts to erode, because misunderstanding is uncomfortable. It's easier to make decisions that are immediately understood, immediately rewarded by the market, immediately validated by analysts. But those decisions are rarely the ones that create long-term value. What happens next? So where does this leave us? What happens when a company built on long-term thinking
faces an institutional environment designed to reward short-term results. I don't have a crystal ball, I can't predict the future, but I can tell you what the patterns suggest. If Amazon continues down the path of defensive optimization, if it prioritizes regulatory compliance over invention, if it prioritizes shareholder returns over long-term bets, if it prioritizes internal harmony over productive tension, then it will slowly become just another large company, still successful, still profitable, but no longer transformational. That's not a dramatic collapse, it's a slow fade. The kind you don't notice until years later when you look back and realize the company stopped being interesting. On the other hand, if Amazon and specifically Andy Jassy can resist that gravitational pull, if they can maintain the day one mentality even under intense pressure, then Amazon could remain one of the most dynamic companies on the planet. But that requires something rare, the courage to be unpopular. It requires making decisions that Wall Street hates in the short term. It requires enduring regulatory battles instead of capitulating. It requires promoting people who challenge the status quo instead of those who maintain order. And most importantly, it requires leadership that genuinely believes in the long-term vision, not as a marketing slogan, but as a governing principle they're willing to defend when it's costly. The broader lesson. Now, why does any of this matter to you? Because this isn't just an Amazon story. This is a story about how all institutions, companies, governments, even individuals face the same fundamental tension, short-term survival versus long-term significance. If you're building something, if you're leading a team, if you're making decisions about your career or your investments, you're facing the same choice Amazon is facing right now. Do you optimize for what's immediately rewarded, or do you build for what will matter in 10 years? The former is safer, the latter is harder, but only the latter creates something that lasts. I've always believed that the best investments, whether financial or strategic, are the ones that seem crazy in the moment but obvious in hindsight. The problem is, you can't know which is which until enough time has passed. That's why principles matter. That's why having a clear philosophy matters. Because when everyone around you is panicking, when the pressure is mounting, when the easy path is staring you in the face, the only thing that keeps you on course is a deep belief in what you're building. Bezos had that belief. The question is whether Amazon, as an institution, can maintain it without him at the helm. Final thoughts. Look, I don't know what's going to happen to Amazon. I don't know if Andy Jassy will prove to be the right leader for this moment. I don't know if the internal fracture I'm describing will heal or widen, but I know this. The decisions Amazon makes in the next few years will define its next decade. And those decisions won't be made in earnings calls or press releases. They'll be made in quiet meetings, in strategic planning sessions, in conversations between leaders who have to choose between what's popular and what's right. This is true for all of us. The most important decisions we make are the ones no one sees. The ones that don't show up on a quarterly report or a performance review. The ones that only matter when you look back 10 years later and realize that's when everything changed. So if you're building something, here's my advice. Don't let the pressure to optimize in the short term kill your long-term vision. Understand the trade-offs. Be honest about the costs. But don't abandon what makes you different just because it's hard to defend. Because the world doesn't need more optimized companies, it needs more transformational ones. And transformation always looks reckless until it doesn't. If this analysis resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who's building something that matters. Subscribe to stay updated on these deep dives into business strategy, leadership, and long-term thinking. And let me know in the comments, do you think Amazon can maintain its day one mentality? Or are we watching the slow maturation of a company that used to be willing to be misunderstood? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.